Welcome to Faith Fondue, a new podcast featuring author and speaker Haley DeMaria and teacher and blogger Ann Strickers. Faith Fondue will feature a melting pot of topics, ignited by a flame, our faith, and guided by the Holy Spirit. It's the week of May 2nd, the 5th week of April, and as we continue through this Easter season, we continue to share our podcast with you. Good morning, Ann.
Good morning, Haley. This is season 2, episode 3. And we're about to just talk about the flame. What's hot this week? We have a couple things on tap: the Oscars, the NFL draft, and prom.
Yeah.
Talk to me about prom, Haley. I saw the photos.
Yep, it is prom season. And, schools across the country are kind of all over the place with prom. Some are holding them, some are not. Some have canceled them. I've heard of some families kind of going rogue and holding their own proms, if the school's not willing to have them. My son's school did not hold a senior prom. Of course, my son's a junior, but their sister school, Mount DeSales, did. They're a smaller school. It's about 100 girls per grade. They had the prom outside under a tent. All the students wore masks. My son was fortunate enough to be asked to go. And I have to tell you, it was just really great to see a little slice of normal, right? This class of 2021, I think, has kind of had a rough go of it. I think the class of 2020, everybody rallied behind them because they felt so badly that life was shut down so quickly. And really, the class of 2021 has had not a normal senior year at all. Yeah. And so it was really heartwarming to just see kids being able to be kids.
Yep.
Yeah, it was really nice. But there's another side to prom too that's very real. I just read this morning an article about, it was actually a car that had 4 students in it driving to their senior prom, and they were T-boned by a drunk driver and, hadn't been drinking themselves. And unfortunately, 2 of them were killed. And, Ann, you and I, grew up kind of in the same era of MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, that kind of came about, I feel like, when you and I were kind of, coming of age. And, that is something that is very real, in my life. This past weekend was the 22nd anniversary of, a prom that really changed my life. I wasn't a student. I was a teacher. I was the moderator for our senior student council. It was a class at the high school where I worked. So I met with my senior student council officers every day. And on the night of their senior prom, one of my senior student council officers, Emily L., was leaving her senior prom, and right as they were pulling out of the hotel, was hit by a drunk driver, and she was killed. We watched all of it unfold, and it was, it was a clearly a tragic event. I'm not sure there are words to accurately describe it. For me personally, certainly for the girls and for the family, it was devastating. For me, it gave me a whole new perspective on my own accident. What I saw at Xavier, where I was working at the time, was this community of faith that was mourning. I would imagine in a very similar way to how Notre Dame mourned after our bus accident, with the death of my 2 teammates. But what I saw was this community of faith come together and carry this family through the darkest time in their lives. And I had experienced that at Notre Dame, but I hadn't seen it. I wasn't on campus right after our bus accident. I was in the hospital. Yeah. So to see this tangible, beautiful community support a family and these grieving students during this tragic event, that is really what led me to want to convert to Catholicism. I had felt it at Notre Dame, and I knew this community of faith and the prayerfulness was powerful. But when I saw it again, kind of from a different viewpoint, it made me really understand and appreciate that I never wanted to be without this, that this is how we get through tragedy, is through this beautiful community of faith. So always remember Emily L. this weekend, and really, all the time. And certainly my STUCO girls, my student council officers,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
who suffered, their own tragedy at 18 years old, just like I did.
Yes. Right.
We've always had that connection.
Yeah.
In fact, one of them was my student that just turned 40 a couple weeks ago. So
Lord.
it's
Yes.
uh, it's been a while for all of us, but it's prom season, and we want to remember to celebrate. But of course, we want to be safe as well in
Yeah.
all ways, not just COVID.
Right. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. I know that you've said that about the community. It was really other people, the faith of other people, that prompted you, right, to convert and to join this community of faith. And I just think that message is so life-giving, because I so often, Haley, hear so many stories of where people feel excluded or marginalized, or what the church isn't doing. And there's so much more that we as the body of Christ can do. But it's almost like this inner strength just to know that your lived experience was one where people, responded with love, with kindness, with what we're called to extend to one another. So thanks be to God for that. But also, like, I think of Emily L's family. Like, I hope they know the impact. And I don't know the answer to this. Do they know kind of like that whole story, like the outcome, I mean, of all of this?
They do. I shared it with her mom years later, when it was appropriate, when they weren't,
Sure.
still
Yes.
in the midst of their deep, deep grief. Of course, they always still grieve. And I'm glad I did. I hadn't thought to share it with her, and I'm not even sure I
Yeah.
recognized it myself until much later on. But yes, they do know that, and I was glad that I shared it with them.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did too. And I just am struck by, prom. I'm a little reluctant, but I believe in rites of initiation and, rites of passage. And, in American life, prom is, I would, dare to say, one of them. And I didn't have a great prom experience, so maybe that's why I'm not, celebrating it. But as a young person, right, to dress up, and I think because they call it proma now, drama that goes with prom, and then the events around that, and the amount of money, and there's so much to be critical of.
Yes, the pressure of the promposal. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
promposal, excuse me. Yes. So, but if we were to take it at its best, it sounds like this is an event that marks potentially a return for this class that's been forgotten. And I'm glad to hear that. At St. Francis, we had MORP, which is prom backwards, for juniors, and it was on the football field, or no, maybe on the quad. It was outdoors, and it was very informal. Now, seniors will have prom, but I thought that was very creative, just to kind of, again, make it something different in light of this crazy year.
I know,
So,
and kudos to the schools that are trying, who are doing the best they can in this crazy world to give the students something, something to look forward to, something to talk about with their friends,
yeah.
and just a way to gather in community.
Right, which is a gift.
It
as
is
we
a
know.
gift. It is a gift. So it is prom season, and it is Oscar season. It's a little later than normal, but
That's
that's
what I was thinking,
COVID
right?
Oscars. Yeah.
Is it January or
Yeah,
February?
it used to be January. I think it's kind of
Yeah,
like the Super Bowl. It got pushed to February.
yeah,
But yeah,
yep,
this is definitely very late. I honestly didn't even know the Oscars were coming up until probably the day before, and people started talking about it.
yeah,
I have not seen any of the movies. I'm not
yeah.
even sure I could tell you one that has been nominated, which is awful. So Anne, take it away.
Well, Haley, the reason I know that it was Oscar season, I myself I did not see any of the movies. I love movies. I think I may have mentioned this one summer, made a commitment to watching as many of the top 100 IMDb on the IMDb Internet Movie Database. It's kind of well, no, that's just a registry. AFI, excuse me, American Film Institute, top 100. So like the top 10, I'm like, I have to see this. Think of it as like reading the great books. Like, number one is Citizen Kane, and number two is Casablanca. And I would watch these movies and I'd be like, this isn't that good. Why is this number two? Why is this number six? And then by the end, every time I was like, that was amazing. Like, it really was. Every single one of them won me over. But why I knew this was prom season is because I listen at work. So on my computer, I stream classical music, and the station here in the Bay Area is KDFC. And always before the Oscars, they play the scores of the best score from, as many years as they can.
Love it.
And so, yeah, it's so cool. And so many of the songs we are quite familiar with if it's in classical music version. So one of the songs that I think is just profoundly beautiful is the theme to Out of Africa. Out of Africa did win Best Film in 1986. And my sister really loves the movie. She's talked about it. I never saw it. I don't know why I didn't see it. And so I love this song, and it's by John Barry. And he's actually Sir John Barry because he was knighted because he's so incredibly talented. He died. But at first, I think I confused John Barry and John Williams. So a lot of Americans would probably know John Williams. John Williams' son. Do you know what he's done?
Nope.
Anything? Star Wars.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes.
So he did, believe it or not, like Home Alone. He did Harry Potter. He definitely, it's like any musical artist has his own style. And once you lock in, you're like, oh, that's definitely John Williams. And he's still alive and he's incredibly talented. But John Barry did, Born Free, which was like, we would have been really young, but probably would have seen it maybe on repeat, late on television. But he also did Dances with Wolves, which is a beautiful score. And then he did Out of Africa. So I watched it, and it was, it's a beautiful film. The cinematography, it's set in Kenya, and it's a great story. It's based on a real, two real people, again, pre-colonial Kenya, and just, what's happening at that time. And it's a good story. The plot thickens, the character development is real, and it's sad. And I predicted the ending, and I think you could, but it wasn't like super heavy. And to be honest, in these last few years, some of the films, what we're dealing with, which is real, they're, also real life stories. Like this year's is Nomadland, which I heard is, more of a documentary following homeless people, which is incredibly important that, we hear their voice and know their story. But they just seem so heavy. And so it was nice to watch this movie, and I enjoyed it, and I loved the music. And I just felt like it was a little gift that I got during the Oscar season.
It's interesting, Anne, because there are very few movies these days that will draw me to the theater. And I, of course, COVID aside, shutting down the movie theaters. And I love going to the movie theater. Before we had kids, I would pick Jamie up from the train station. He used to commute into the city on Friday night, and we would go right to dinner and go see a movie. I mean, I love going to the movie theater. But these days, it takes a lot to get me there because the quality of the movies are maybe just not my style. I'm not a big superhero movie, the Avengers, the Marvel movies, the violence in them and the 10-minute long fight scene. That's not something that's going to draw me to the theater. But if there is a recommendation, of course I will go. For a long time, Jamie traveled and would watch a lot of movies on airplanes. So he saw a lot, and I wasn't going because he had pretty much seen everything. But there is a movie that came out just this weekend. It's in AMC theaters. It was actually released last year. It was going to be released last year in the theater, but they streamed it, of course, because the theaters were closed. But it did just was released this weekend, called Fatima. And I watched it because I know the producers who were involved with the story, and I was trying to support them. And it's not a story that I was familiar with. I mean, of course, I've heard of Fatima. I know it's an apparition. That is not a part of my faith life that I'm familiar with, or it's not a part of Catholicism that I was familiar with. I haven't studied it. I haven't read about it. I have now. But it is a beautiful movie. The cinematography is beautiful. The characters are beautiful. You know,
Is that in Portugal?
it
Is it?
is,
Yeah.
yes.
I'd love to go there.
And they filmed all of it there.
Wow.
And it is the children are, you just want to hug them, and the characters are so believable, and yet the doubting that people have of these children is so real. I mean, you can see
Yeah.
all sides because you believe these children wholeheartedly, and yet you completely understand why people don't, and then they do.
Yes.
And it's
Right.
again, it's the movie Fatima. It is in the theaters, but you can also stream it. It's really a
Hmm.
beautiful testament of young, innocent, pure faith.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Awesome.
I will watch it again.
Yeah. Well, thanks. I'll write that down, and that can be one of our takeaways is to check that out. And a friend did recently. She took her son. I think they saw Godzilla. She and her
Ha!
husband and son went to the theater, and I am with you, like Haley. Well, I'm with you in that I love going to the theater, and I still go because part of me knows that if I watch a movie here at home, the likelihood of me being distracted by my phone or my computer or something else, and it's
Right.
just so nice to be in a different setting. Um, but we have it down to a science now where it's like I don't go for the first 15 minutes because I don't want to watch every other ad. And you really can't necessarily make the argument for the communal experience because I've sat in a lot of near empty theaters,
Yeah.
which I mean, honestly, one of my favorite memories of watching the movie The Wrestler with Mickey Rourke was it was packed and it's bloody and it's violent, but everybody's reacting and it's like you are this onlooker to this like to wrestling. Um, and I just, in San Francisco, we have a lot of old theaters and I want to support them and keep them open. I just love all of that. And I don't want that to go away. So it will be interesting to see,
How it returns, and if it
yeah,
does, and hopefully
uh,
it does.
I know. Because
Yeah.
one of my coworkers told me that the big theaters have caused these smaller theaters to close. And I know there's all kinds of like corporate advertising in films now and how they make their money. And it's not this altruistic
Oh no,
effort.
it's not.
Yeah, it's
That I have
big
learned.
money.
Well, I have not seen Nomadland. That's probably one that I would like to watch. I, like you, am behind on current movies. But I did recently watch Draft Day. It came
Hmm.
out in
Al
2004.
Pacino? Is that right?
No, Kevin Costner.
Okay.
Yeah, so Dances with Wolves.
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking any given Sunday. Okay. All
Yep.
right.
It's
Yeah.
it's 7 years old, so I am a little behind. But I loved it. And of course, this past week was the NFL draft,
Of
and
course. Yeah.
it's a big day in our house that was consumed our family group chat throughout the week. What Notre Dame players are going to get drafted, where are they going to go?
Yeah. We got one here in San Francisco.
We got one
Thanks.
here in Baltimore.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Dale and
Yeah.
Hayes. So we always love it when
Oh, yes.
our
Yes.
we get our Irish Ravens. So we're always, talking about who the Ravens want, who the Ravens need, how are we going to get them, and
Of course. Yeah.
what is it about the draft? Why do we love it?
I, yeah, I mean, people do really love it. I think it's fascinating. My own father, like, I really think it's the most important thing in his life for that week. And he, altered his mass schedule. This man, went to the same mass time every year. And if it's draft day, though, however, that was not going to get in the way of the draft. I did watch on Thursday night. I don't watch Friday and Saturday. Although, I was at my parents' on Saturday, so I definitely checked in on the draft. But yeah, I mean, I think you kind of nailed it when we talked earlier. You are witnessing people's dreams, literally, like on the camera, they come true. Now, that is, I mean, what can be more exciting than that? Other than like here in San Francisco with a third pick, there's just all the talk, the surmising, the guesses, and one of the GM is John Lynch, and I'm a big fan. And they said, quote unquote, unrelenting in his honesty. He's both able to tell the truth and keep secrets because nobody knew. And, he's working with Kyle Shanahan as the coach, but, there was rumors about Aaron Rodgers. And so he just answered the question. He's like, yes, I called him. I asked him, and he just answers the question. He's honest, but he's telling the truth about what happened. And I don't know, in this day of, WikiLeaks or all the social media things, people can still keep secrets. Who knew, right? There's still some surprises.
There are, and I do think that's what we love about it. There's nothing there's nothing better than a pick that that's not going to go the way you think it goes. But
right,
it is watching a child's dream come true. And they're kids. They may be 20, 21, 22, but they are kids. And for many of them, it is life changing.
Yes, and you definitely see that.
And that is monumental, and that is exciting. You're just so happy for these kids, especially, you coach, you were an athlete, I was an athlete, even though neither of us played nearly at the level that these players are playing at, but we still have an understanding of what it takes to get there, right? So this is the culmination of their entire lives, not just their athletic careers, but their families and the sacrifices. And it's really, that is, I guess, the good side of, social media and all of it being on TV is they're allowing us to share in this very intimate, life-changing, dream come true moment. It's priceless.
It is, it's just a fun question to ask, any football fan. Why do you love the draft? Because you're going to get different answers. And, I was thinking about that this week. Why we love sports is they carry a story, but they allow us to ask great questions. And, why do you love the draft? Or another question would be, I was on faculty retreat, second year Holy Cross educators, and the leader is a football coach, and we here had spring football in California because of COVID. And then after the last game of the season, Dan was saying, all of us coaches said to each other, I love you before we said goodnight. And he's like, here's this hyper masculine sport, and yet we're saying I love you. And I wasn't surprised in the least, because I thought, what is it about football that allows young people to so comfortably express their emotions when you wouldn't expect that? So a great question. Or here in the Bay Area, in San Francisco, the San Francisco Giants were in first place. We've lost 2 games in San Diego, but they're playing way above their capacity. So I don't know if that's the coach in me or just a sports fan, what allows a team to play above their capacity? So
it's good emotion. Question. Yeah, something to think about for sure. Right? Something to stew about as we move into our spiritual stew.
Nice transition. Yes. Yeah. So what do you have cooking?
So this,
in terms of the gospel or anything?
This weekend in particular, it was right around the 1st of May. It's May 1. My spiritual stew really comes from, this year-long study of the saints that I keep claiming that I have as I'm digging into different saints. And, for our regular listeners, if there's any out there, I've been thinking about the saints. And this weekend was the feast day for Saint Joseph the Worker, which is different than Saint Joseph's Day, which is March 19th. But May 1st, Saint Joseph the Worker Day. It's also May Day, or International Workers' Day. So as a history major, as I'm studying the saints, I sort of did a deeper dive into Saint Joseph the Worker Day, how it differs from Saint Joseph's feast day, and why we have any of this. So, as we know, Jesus's dad, Joseph was a carpenter. He was a worker. He was a skilled laborer. That was part of the wonder of him, the marvel of him. He was just literally a regular Joe. He was not a king. He was not, elevated in any way. He was, and I'd be curious. What I should have looked up is that where the term came from? Regular
I just
Joe.
Thought about that. As you said it.
Yeah, but historically, May 1st, is celebrated as May Day. If we go back to the Celts, thousand, years ago, May Day was a time to celebrate the midpoint of the year. It was the midpoint between the light and the dark. And that was a huge time to celebrate. That was a day that they celebrated, was May 1st. And, it turned into sort of this International Workers' Day in the
Yeah.
kind of mid to late 1800s,
Hmm.
as the industrial revolution came about and exploded, and you have all of these really inhumane working conditions
Yeah.
in factories, and
Yep.
it eventually led to the form of unions, and you had what was established as the 8-hour workday that was
Yeah.
to commence, it was to begin on May 1st, 1886. So
Mm.
they
Mm.
then celebrated May 1st as
Yeah.
as this Labor Day, as this Workers' Day, International Workers' Day. And that really was sort of, usurped by the communists, and it became very synonymous with communism,
Mhm.
celebrating the worker. And, there's a great picture we'll share of these May Day International Workers' Day celebrations in Russia, where they, celebrated communism. So, as
Yeah.
a way to combat communism,
Yeah.
in 1955, Pope Pius XII established or declared May 1st as St. Joseph the Worker Day. So it
Mm.
was as a
Yeah.
way to counterbalance, to combat
Yep.
communism, was to establish, or I guess reestablish, this as a holy day, as a
Wow.
day to celebrate. And,
Yeah.
of course, who's a greater worker than Jesus's father?
Yeah. Yeah. So much to consider there. So thanks, Haley, for putting your history degree to good use. Father Blance would really appreciate
He
that. Father
would.
Tom, shout out to the Notre Dame History Department. But I think of, Rerum Novarum is the encyclical Leo the 13th in 1891 that talks about the rights of the worker. So the church has had a longstanding commitment to, protecting human rights and that we are not to be exploited. But John Paul II wrote about this explicitly, like when we work and when we create, we become co-creators with God, so that work has real dignity. It's a good thing, even though, in the garden, we were told, we were banished and we would have to work and labor, but that work can be also a path towards, right, holiness, or again, using your gifts and talents, like human flourishing. But it's always at odds in society. So I appreciate you mentioning, like, yeah, communist Russia, or I think of like Einmachfrei, which is that the worker camp Auschwitz. Work will set you free. What irony, what cruel irony that work
Yeah.
will set these Jews free. So they're closely linked because it can turn life giving, or also taking someone of their dignity. So it's interesting that Joseph stands at the as a model for all of that. I was told after I went to Israel, I guess I understood it. Like the word, we were always told growing up he was this carpenter, and they said it's really tekton is the word, like, which means like craftsman,
Hmm.
because there's just not a lot of like trees and forestry in that area. So like you see a lot of stone, especially like in Jerusalem and the outstanding areas. So he would have worked, yes, with some like wood, but also like a lot of stone. So
Oh,
I,
interesting.
I know, I thought that was interesting too. And I just think of the way that the day is expressed, for example, in Spanish speaking countries, March 19th is Father's Day.
Interesting.
So what a close linkage between Joseph and, Dia de la Padre, obviously. And then this month, obviously, we have coming up next week, and I hope your family does something special for you. We have Mother's Day, and May is the month of Our Lady. So it begins with Joseph, her chaste spouse, but it's dedicated to Mary. And we'll be having a May crowning at school this Thursday, in honor of Our Lady. So many, rich traditions within the faith at this time.
Yeah, and it's always so interesting. It's one of the things, I love being American. I love living in this country. But I also really love and appreciate and find fascinating all of the religious significance that is very fundamental to other countries as well, right?
Mhm.
You know, the Latin American countries are very religious folk. You know, there's religion
Yeah.
is a very much a part of their day to day life. It's a part. You know, they don't have separation of church and state, I think is what I'm trying to say. You know, we see that in Europe too, as well, in many of the countries. But you know, here we don't have that. So, gosh, I would love for Father's Day in the United States to be on March 19th. I think that's amazing.
Mhm.
You know, it just makes perfect
Yeah.
sense that you would celebrate
Right.
Father's Day with the Feast of St.
Right.
Joseph. We celebrate Mother's Day
Yes.
in the month of Mary.
Right.
You know,
Right.
maybe
If
that
you're a
was
Christian,
intentional.
if you're a Christian,
If you're a
though.
Christian, true, true,
Yeah.
true, true.
Right. Yeah.
But so I love the melting pot and, you know, all of the
Yeah.
religions in the United States, of course. But I do also really appreciate the religions that are fundamental to our neighboring countries as well. So, you
Well,
know,
before we move to our takeaway, I mean, I would say, my mom always like told us growing up, Mother's Day is a made up holiday by Hallmark, and yet, if we don't do something special that day,
exactly.
we wouldn't even think of it. We
Well,
wouldn't think
and
because we love
we'll
her.
have to talk about Mother's Day, yeah, perhaps next week because it does have Notre Dame ties. So stay tuned for that.
Okay. All right.
But you know, our takeaways this week as we wrap this up. You know, I will pray for all moms as we enter, and I will pray to Our Lady. You know, as we enter into this month of May, and I really am going to be praying for our seniors. You know, whether it's high school, college. This class of 2021 is, I don't want to call them the forgotten class. Again, I mentioned that before, but you know, I really hope that they are feeling like wherever they are, that their time is wrapping up in a meaningful
I
way for
agree.
them.
Yeah.
Whether it's celebrating with proms or graduations or whatever that looks like for them, I hope those celebrations can be held. They can be held safely, not just because of COVID, but in all ways. So they will have my prayers, certainly, as the takeaway this week.
Awesome. Well, my takeaway is just a shout out and a recommendation for our listeners. When we look for the spiritual stew, we go to the USCCB website. So that's the United States Catholic Conference of Bishops. You can get the daily readings there, but I want to give them a shout out because it's not just the written word. They have, Haley, you can listen audio. They have a podcast recording of the readings. So you could walk and pray with that on your commute. There's video reflection. It's linked to a calendar or weekly, so you know that this is the 5th week of Easter. It's so well organized. So they have done a great job helping us to access the word, which is essential, right? If in a life of faith is really that familiarity with Scripture, but so the Scripture can come to life. So we'll link that in our show notes.
Awesome. Yep, I agree. USCCB is awesome. You can listen to, again, as you mentioned, their podcast after you listen to ours. Again, subscribe, Faith Fondue. You can find us on iTunes, Apple Podcasts. You can go to our website, faithfondue.com. All of our episodes are housed there as well. And we look forward to sharing next week with you as well.
Thanks so much.
Have a
Have a
great
good week.
week. Thanks, Anne.